The norm is for everyone to die together. Very glad that I'm still alive. Fortunate that I'm still alive. Klein shivered and quickly ran to the door, trying to catch up with the policeman and asked for protection. But as soon as he reached the handle, he suddenly stopped. That officer talked so horribly about it, why didn't they protect me, an important witness or key lead? Isn't that too careless? Were they just probing me, or maybe it's a bait? All kinds of thoughts rushed into Klein's mind. He suspected that the police were still secretly watching him, observing his reaction. He felt much calmer after thinking of this and was no longer so panicked. He slowly opened the door, deliberately shouting with the trembling voice at the staircase, "You guys will protect me, right?" Tap, tap, tap. There was no response from the police officers, and there was no change in the rhythm of the contact between the leather shoes and the wooden stairs. "I know, you'll do that," Klein shouted again in a tone of faint conviction, trying to act like a normal person that was in danger. The sound of footsteps gradually weakened and disappeared into the bottom floor of the apartment. Klein snorted and laughed. Isn't that response too fake? Their acting skills are not up to standard. He did not run after them. Instead, he turned back to the room and closed the door behind him. In the next few hours, Klein fully expressed what they called back in Foodaholic Empire, China restlessness, nervousness, agitation, inadvertence and murmuring words that he did not understand. He did not slack just because there was no one around. This is called the self-cultivation of an actor. He laughed at himself in his heart. When the sun moved to the west, the clouds on the horizon appeared to be reddish-orange. Tenants in the apartment came home one after another. Klein shifted his focus elsewhere. Melissa is almost done with school. He looked at the stove, lifted the kettle, peeled off the coal and took out the revolver. Without pause or delay, he reached to the back of the board under the double-decked bed where more than 10 wooden strips were staggered out. After clipping the left wheel between a piece of wooden strip and board, Klein straightened up and waited uneasily, fearing that the police would burst open the door and rush into the room with guns in their hands. If it was an age of steam, he was certain he would not be seen by anyone when he did that. However, there were extraordinary powers here, ones that he had proven through his own experiences. After waiting for a few minutes, there was no movement at the door. There was only the chatter between two tenants who were heading for the heart of the wild bar on Iron Cross Street. Phew, Klein exhaled, feeling assured. All he needed to do was wait for Melissa's return and cook the stewed mutton with tender peas. When the idea came to Klein's mind, his mouth seemed to taste the rich flavor of the gravy. He remembered how Melissa cooked stewed mutton with tender peas. First, she boiled the water and stir-fried the meat. Then, she added onions, salt, a little pepper, and water. After a specific period of time, the peas and potatoes were added, and the stew was to be cooked for an additional 40 or 50 minutes with the lid on. It's indeed a simple and crude way to do it, supported purely by the flavors of the meat itself. Klein shook his head. But there was no other way about it. It was hard for commoners to have many kinds of condiments and various cooking methods. They could only pursue simple, practical, and economical methods. As long as the meat was not burnt or spoiled, anything was good for people who could only eat meat once or twice a week. Klein was not a very good cook himself and ordered takeout food most of the time. But by cooking 3 or 4 times a week, after many weeks of accumulated practice, he had a passing standard and felt that he would not let a pound of mutton down. When Melissa comes back to cook it, it will be done after 7:30 p.m. She would be starving by then. It's time for her to see what real cooking is. Klein made an excuse for himself. First, he started the fire again, went to the bathroom to collect water, and washed the mutton. Then he took out the kitchen boards and knives before chopping the mutton into tiny chunks. As for the explanation for his sudden culinary skills, he decided to blame it on the dead Welsh McGovern, who had not only hired a chef who was good at the mid-sea flavor, but also often created his own delicacies and invited people to try them. Well, the dead cannot refute me. Nevertheless, TSK, this is a world with beyonders. The dead are not necessarily unable to speak. With that in mind, Klein was a little guilty conscience. He threw aside his confused thoughts and put the meat into the soup bowl. Then he took out the condiment box and added in a spoonful of the crude salt, half of which had begun yellowing. In addition, he cautiously took some black pepper grains from a special smaller bottle, mixing and marinating them together. He placed the saucepan on the stove and, while waiting for it to heat up, Klein rummaged for the carrots from yesterday and cut them into pieces with the onions he bought today. When he was done with his preparations, he took out a small can from the cupboard and opened it. There was not much lard left in it. Klein took a spoonful, put it in the pan, and melted it. He added in the carrots and onions and stirred it for a while. As the fragrance began to pervade, Klein poured all the mutton into the pot and fried it with care for a while. He should have added cooking wine in the process, or red wine at least. However, the Moretti family did not have these luxuries and could only drink a glass of beer a week. Klein had to make do with whatever was available and poured in some boiled water. After stewing for about 20 minutes, he opened the lid, put the tender peas and cut potatoes in it, and added a cup of hot water and 2 spoons of salt. He closed the lid, lowered the fire, and exhaled satisfactorily, waiting for his sister to reach home. As seconds turned into minutes, the fragrance in the room intensified. There was the allure from the meat, the rich smell of potatoes, and the refreshing scent of onions. The smell gradually mixed up, and Klein swallowed his saliva from time to time, keeping track of the time with his pocket watch. After more than 40 minutes, some not so brisk but rhythmic footsteps approached. A key was inserted, the handle was turned, and the door opened. Before Melissa came in, she whispered doubtfully, "Smells good." With her bag still in her hand, she stepped in and glanced over at the stove. "You made this?" Melissa took off her veiled hat and her hand paused mid-air, looking at Klein in astonishment. She twitched her nose and inhaled more of the fragrance. Her eyes quickly softened, and she seemed to find some confidence. "You made this?" she asked again. "Are you afraid I'd waste the mutton?" Klein smiled and returned with a question. Without waiting for an answer, he said to himself, "Don't worry, I specifically asked Welsh to teach me how to cook this dish. You know, he is a good cook." First time, Melissa's eyebrows creased subconsciously, but they were smoothed by the fragrance. "It looks like I'm talented," Klein laughed. "It's almost done. Put your books and veil hat down somewhere. Go to the bathroom and wash your hands, and then get ready to taste it. I'm very confident about it." When she heard her brother's orderly arrangements and saw his gentle and calm smile, Melissa stood rooted at the door and failed to respond in her daze. Do you prefer the mutton to be cooked longer? Klein urged with a laugh. Ah, okay. Melissa jolted back to her senses. With handbag and veil in each hand, she rushed into the room quickly. When the lid of the saucepan was uncovered, a sudden blast of steam appeared before Klein's eyes. 2 pieces of rye bread were already placed to the side of the mutton and tender peas, allowing them to absorb the fragrance and heat to become soft. By the time Melissa had packed her items, washed her hands and face, and returned, a plate of stewed mutton with tender peas, potatoes, carrots and onions was already placed on the table. 2 pieces of rye bread, coloured by a light dip into the gravy, were on their plates. Come on, try it. Klein pointed to the wooden fork and spoon next to the plate. Melissa was still a little confused. She didn't refuse. She picked up a potato with her fork, put it into her mouth and bit it lightly. The taste of the starchy potato and gravy fragrance flooded her mouth. Her saliva secretion went crazy as she gobbled down the potato in a few mouthfuls. Try the mutton. Klein gestured at the plate with his chin. He had tasted it just now and thought it was barely at a passing standard, but it was enough for a girl who was inexperienced with what the world had to offer. After all, she only ate meat occasionally. Melissa's eyes were filled with anticipation as she carefully forked some mutton. It was very tender and, as soon as it entered the mouth, nearly melted. The fragrance of the meat exploded in her mouth, filling it with delicious meat juices. It was an unprecedented feeling, and it made Melissa unable to stop eating. By the time she realized it, she had already eaten several pieces of the mutton. Aye, Klein, this was supposed to be prepared for you, Melissa blushed and stammered. I'd nibbled some of the food just now. It's the privilege of being a cook. Klein smiled and soothed her sister. He picked up his fork and spoon. At times, he would eat a piece of meat and sometimes, he would stuff his mouth full of peas. At other times, he would put down the utensils, break off a piece of rye bread and dip it in gravy. Melissa relaxed and was immersed in the delicacy again by Klein's normal behavior. It's really delicious. It doesn't seem like you were doing it for the first time. Melissa looked at the empty dish and praised him with all her heart. Even the gravy was finished. It's a long way from Welsh's chef. When I'm rich, I'll take you and Benson out to the restaurant and have a better meal, Klein said. He was beginning to look forward to it himself. Your interview, but Melissa did not finish her words because she suddenly let out a sound of contentment involuntarily. She put her hand over her mouth in a hurry and looked embarrassed. The fault is with the stewed mutton with tender peas just now. It was just too delicious. Klein laughed secretly and decided not to make fun of his sister. He pointed to the plate and said, this is your mission. All right. Melissa stood up immediately, took the basin and rushed out the door. When she came back, she opened the cupboard to check the condiment box and other items as per normal. Did you just use them? Melissa was surprised, and turned to Klein, holding the black pepper bottle and lard can. Klein shrugged his shoulders and laughed. Just a little. It's the price of a delicacy. Melissa's eyes twinkled, her expression changing for a few moments, before she finally said, let me cook in the future. You have to hurry up and prepare for the interview. You have to think about your job. Melissa, can you not rub my nose in it? Klein muttered inwardly. He felt a throbbing pain in his head. The amount of content Klein had forgotten was considered a lot, but neither was it negligible. The interview was in 2 days, so how could he find the time to make up for it? Furthermore, he was involved in such strange paranormal activity, so how would it be possible that he would be in the mood to revise? Klein gave his sister a perfunctory response and began putting on the appearance of studying. Melissa moved a chair over to sit beside him. With light shining from the gas lamp, she began working on her assignments. The atmosphere was serene. When it was almost 11 o'clock, the siblings bade each other good night and went to bed. Knock. 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 Poundings on the door roused Klein from his dreams. He peered out of the window to see the first glimmer of dawn. In a daze, he flipped over and sat up. Who is it? Look at the time now. Why didn't Melissa wake me up? It's me, Dunn Smith, a man with a deep voice outside the door replied. Dunn Smith, don't know him. Klein got off his bed and shook his head as he walked towards the door. He opened the door to see the grey-eyed police inspector whom he had met the day before standing in front of him. Alarmed, Klein asked, is there something wrong? The policeman replied with a stern look, we found a carriage driver. He testified that you had gone to Mr. Welsh's place on the 27th, the day when Mr. Welsh and Miss Leah died. Furthermore, Mr. Welsh was the one who paid for your transportation fees. Klein was startled. He did not feel a tinge of fear or guilt that one would expect from having his lies exposed. It was because he was not even lying. In fact, he was surprised by the evidence provided by Dunn Smith. On the 27th of June, the former Klein had indeed gone to Mr. Welsh's place. On the night that he returned, he killed himself, the exact same way as Welsh and Leah did. Klein gave a forced smile and said, this is insufficient evidence. It does not directly prove that I am associated with the death of Welsh and Leah. Honestly speaking, I'm also very curious about the whole incident. I want to know what exactly happened to my 2 poor friends. But I really can't remember. In fact, I have almost completely forgotten what I had done on the 27th. You may find it hard to believe, but I fully relied on the diaries I had written to roughly make a guess that I had gone to Welsh's place on the 27th. You sure have great mental fortitude, Dunn Smith said while nodding. He showed not a trace of anger, nor was he smiling. You should be able to hear my sincerity. Klein looked him straight in the eye and said, I'm telling the truth, of course, only part of it. Dunn Smith did not give an immediate response. He swept his glance across the room before saying slowly, Mr. Welsh lost a revolver. I guess I should be able to find it here. Right, Mr. Klein? Indeed, Klein finally understood where the revolver had come from. A thought flashed in his mind, and he came to the final verdict in an instant. He raised his hands halfway and retreated, leaving a path open. Then, he signaled at the bunk bed with his chin. Behind the bedboard. He did not specifically mention that it was the bottom deck, as no one would normally hide things at the back of the bedboard on an upper deck. That would be too obvious for guests to notice at a glance. Dunn Smith did not move forward. The corners of his mouth twitched as he asked, nothing to add on? Without hesitation, Klein replied, there is. Yesterday, when I woke up in the middle of the night, I realized I was laying on my desk with a revolver beside me. There was a bullet at the corner of the room. It was as if I had committed suicide. But due to a lack of experience of never having used a gun, or maybe I was too scared at the final moment anyway, the bullet did not achieve the desired result. My head is still in its place. I am still alive now. And since then, I have lost some memories, including what I saw and did at Welsh's place on the 27th. I'm not lying. I really can't remember. For the sake of being eliminated as a suspect. For the sake of getting rid of all these strange events surrounding him, Klein explained almost everything that had happened. Except the transmigration and gathering. Also, Klein was careful with his words, allowing every sentence to be amenable. Such as, not revealing the fact that the bullet had hit his brains, but only mentioning that it did not achieve the desired result, and that his head was still in its place. To others, these two statements might seem to convey the exact same ideas, but in reality they were like chalk and cheese. Dunsmith listened quietly, then said, "This corresponds with what I had surmised. It also corresponds with the hidden logic of similar incidents in the past. Of course, I have no idea how you managed to survive. I'm glad you believe in me. I don't know how I survived either." Klein heaved a small sigh of relief. But Dun threw out a conjunction. "There is no use in me believing you. You are currently the prime suspect. You have to be confirmed by an expert that you have indeed forgotten what you went through, or that you indeed have nothing to do with the deaths of Mr. Welsh and Miss Nelia." He coughed, his expression becoming serious. "Mr. Klein, I seek your cooperation on coming with me to the police station for the investigation. This should take roughly 2 to 3 days if it is confirmed that there are no issues with you." "The expert is here?" Klein asked blankly in return. "Didn't they say it would take another 2 days?" "She came earlier than expected." Dun turned sideways, signaling for Klein to leave. "Allow me to leave a note," Klein requested. Benson was still away and Melissa had gone to school. He could only leave a note to inform them that he was involved in an incident associated with Welsh so that they would not worry about him. Dun nodded, barely minding. "All right." Klein returned to the desk. As he searched for paper, he began thinking about what was about to occur. Honestly speaking, he did not wish to meet the expert. After all, he had a bigger secret. In a place where there were 7 major churches, under the premise that Emperor Russell, who was suspected to be a transmigrator predecessor, was assassinated. A thing like transmigration usually meant having to go to court and enter arbitration. But, without weapons, combat skills, or superpowers, he was no match for a professional policeman. What's more, a few of Dun's subordinates were standing in the dark outside. Once they draw their guns and shoot at me, I'd be finished. I'll take one step at a time." Klein left a note, grabbed his keys, and followed Dun out the room. Along the dark aisle, 4 policemen in black and white checkered uniforms split into pairs and guarded them on both sides. They were very alert. Tap, tap, tap. Klein followed alongside Dun as they went down the wooden stairs, which occasionally creaked in protest. Outside the apartment, there was a 4-wheeled carriage. On the side of the carriage, there was the 2 crossed swords and a crown police emblem. Their surroundings were crowded and bustling with noise as usual. "Go on, up," Dun signaled for Klein to go first. Klein was just about to step forward when an oyster seller suddenly grabbed a customer and claimed that he was a thief. Both parties wrestled and triggered a response from the horses, causing great chaos. An opportunity. There wasn't much time for Klein to think any further. He bent forward and dashed towards the crowd. Either shoving or dodging, he escaped frantically towards the other end of the street. Right now, for the sake of not meeting the expert, he could only proceed by going to the pier outside the city, taking a boat down the Tussock River and escaping to the capital, Bagland. The population was higher there, making it easier to hide. Of course, he could also get on a steam train, go eastward to the nearest inlet harbour and take the sea route to Pritz, then towards Bagland. Not long after, Klein arrived at the street and made a turn onto Iron Cross Street. There were several carriages that could be hired. To the pier outside the city, Klein reached out his hand and hopped onto one of the carriages. He had thought through things clearly. Firstly, he had to mislead the police that were coming for him. Once the carriage was a suitable distance away from them, he would jump right off. Alrighty, the carriage driver tugged at the reins. Clope, 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 the carriage left Iron Cross Street. Just as Klein was about to jump off the carriage, he noticed that it had turned into another road. It wasn't leading out of the city. "Where are you going?" Klein blurted in his momentary daze. "To Welsh's place," the carriage driver answered monotonously. "What?" Klein was at a loss for words. The carriage driver turned around, exposing his cold grey eyes. It was Dunsmith, the grey-eyed policeman. "You." Klein was flustered. Everything suddenly became a blur as though the world spun around him when he instantly sat up. Sat up? Klein looked around, confused. He noticed the crimson moon outside the window and the room being covered in a crimson veil. He reached out with his hand to feel his forehead. It was all moist and cold, cold and sweat. His back felt exactly the same. It was a nightmare. Klein heaved a sigh. All is well, all is well. He found it weird. He was rather clear-minded in his dream. He was even able to think calmly. After calming down, Klein looked at his pocket watch. It was only 2 in the morning. He got out of bed quietly and planned to head to the washroom where he could wash his face and empty his burgeoning bladder. He opened the door and walked along the dark corridor. Under the dim moonlight, he walked lightly towards the washroom. Suddenly, he noticed a silhouette outside the window at the end of the corridor. That silhouette was wearing a black windbreaker that was shorter than a coat, but longer than a jacket. That silhouette was partly camouflaged in the darkness, bathing in the crimson moonlight. That silhouette turned around slowly. His eyes deep, grey, and cold. Dunsmith. Plop. Klein could not help but take a step back. For a moment he was unsure if he was awake or still in his dreams. The silhouette took off his black top hat and bowed a little as he said with a smile, reintroducing myself, Nitork, Dunsmith. Nitork, one of the code names of the Church of the Evernight Goddess beyond the team's witch, Justice, and the Hanged Man mentioned before. Klein suddenly realized something, and exclaimed after making a connection, "You can control dreams." "You just made me dream of that." That talk, Dunn Smith wore his black hat again, concealing his slightly high hairline. With deep grey eyes he said, "No, I only entered your dream and made the necessary guidance." His voice was deep and soothing. It reverberated through the dimly lit corridor without disturbing the sweet dreams of others, in dreams. Even though much of your usually suppressed emotions and various dark thoughts in you were amplified, making everything seem chaotic, absurd, and crazy, they are all rooted in reality, since reality exists. For veterans like me, everything is crystal clear. Compared to a conscious you, I believe you in your dreams more. This what normal human being could control his dream? If I had dreamed of something on Earth, wouldn't Dunn Smith have noticed? Klein was petrified by what had happened in the dream. Yet he quickly found it bizarre. He remembered being very much sober and rational, knowing what to say and what not to say. To put it simply, it did not feel like dreaming at all. So, Dunn Smith only saw what I wanted him to see? Klein's mind whirled as he gained a glimmer of understanding. This is a perk that resulted from transmigration. Like having a special body and soul. Or was it the effects of that luck enhancement ritual? So, Mr. Smith, do you believe that I really lost my memory? Klein organized his thoughts and asked in reply. Dunn Smith did not answer him directly. Instead he looked at him keenly. You are actually not surprised by the course of events. I've met people who wouldn't believe in the power of the Beyonders, and they would rather believe that they haven't really woken up. Klein tersely acknowledged as he said, "Perhaps, I have always been praying, hoping that there was such power to help me." An interesting train of thought. Perhaps you survived not only because you were lucky. Dunn nodded expressionlessly. I can now confirm that you really lost parts of your memories due to the incident, especially those related to it. So can I go back now? Klein heaved a long sigh of relief in his heart as he probed. Dunn placed a hand in his pocket and walked slowly towards Klein, the surrounding darkness becoming tranquil and gentle. No, you still have to come with me to see the expert, he smiled politely and said. Why? Klein blurted out, then added, you don't believe in the findings from my dream? You must be joking. If that expert specializes in hypnosis or mind reading and stuff, then wouldn't my biggest secret be exposed? The consequences would be beyond imagination. I'm quite humble usually, but I'm still confident for things related to dreams. Dunn calmly replied, however, for important key matters, there is no harm in confirming them again. Plus, our specialties lie in different areas. Perhaps, she can help you recover some of your memories. Not waiting for Klein to reply, his voice turned deeper. After all, you're connected to the whereabouts of that Antigonus family notebook. What? Klein froze. Dunn stopped in front of him, locking his grey eyes on Klein's eyes and said, at the scene of the suicide, there was not a single trace of that notebook from the fourth epoch. Welsh is dead. Nia is dead. You are our only lead. All right then. Klein went silent for a moment before exhaling. A missing notebook. Now this is really peculiar. How did I not think about the whereabouts of that notebook from the fourth epoch? Dunn nodded slightly, walking past Klein and said, lock your door and come with me to Welsh's apartment. The expert is waiting for us there. Klein took in a silent breath. His heart was thumping wildly as he felt uneasy. He wanted to decline and even had the intention to run. However, he believed that with what had happened in his dreams, Dunn Smith would have definitely heightened his level of guard. And with the difference in strength between a normal human and a Beyonder, there was little chance of success by using force. He must have a revolver with him too. He must also have had practice using the revolver. Many thoughts flashed past his mind, and eventually Klein chose to accept the reality. All right. Sigh, I can only take one step at a time and see how things unfold. Maybe that miraculous power in my dream will take effect again. Then let's go, Dunn said in an indifferent tone. Klein turned and followed. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly stopped and said, Mr. Smith, I would like to use the bathroom first. I came out originally for the bathroom. Dunn did not stop him. Instead, he gave him a keen look and said, no problem, Klein. Believe me, I am far more powerful than you can imagine in the dark night. In the dark night, Klein silently repeated this phrase. He did not make any reckless attempt to escape and honestly relieved himself. He then washed his face with cold water, completely calming himself down. Klein changed his outfit and closed the door to his apartment. With gentle steps, Klein followed Dunn down the stairs and walked towards the building's entrance. In such a tranquil setting, Dunn Smith opened his mouth and spoke suddenly. At the end of the dream, why did you try to escape? What were you afraid of? Klein immediately thought of an answer as he said, I do not remember what I did at Welsh's place, nor do I remember if I was directly involved in Welsh's and Nia's deaths. I was afraid that if it was really proven to be my doing, I would rather gamble and escape. I can then start anew in the southern continent. I would have done the same if I were you, Dunn said as he pushed open the door to the building, letting in a cool midnight breeze to disperse the sweltering heat inside. He was not afraid of Klein running away as he got on the carriage. It was exactly the one Klein had dreamed of, a 4-wheeled carriage drawn by a single horse and the carriage driver. There was also the police emblem of double-crossed swords that clustered a crown carved onto the side of the carriage. Klein followed into the carriage. Inside, there was a thick carpet laid out and the place was filled with a soothing fragrance. Having sat down, he looked for a topic to probe for more information. Mr. Smith, what if if the expert confirms that I have really forgotten a part of my memories? And that there is no other evidence which points to me being the perpetrator or a victim, would this be over? In theory, yes, we will try to search for the notebook through other means. As long as it exists, it can be found. Of course, before that, we will have to make sure you are not cursed or have any central cacodemons and that there are no related psychological problems lingering. We must ensure that you can embrace the rest of your life peacefully and healthily. Dunn Smith had a smile on his face, a rather unusual smile. Klein caught on to this point keenly, and promptly inquired, in theory? Yes, only in theory. In this field of work, there are always twisted, unorthodox, and inexplicable things happening. Dunn looked Klein in the eye and said, their continuation or end are not what we can foresee or control at times. For example, Klein actually felt frightened for a moment. The carriage sped through an almost empty street. Dunn took out his tobacco pipe and sniffed it, saying, when we believe that things have come to an end, with everything going back to normal, it would resurface in a terrifying, chilling way. A few years ago, we handled a case regarding an evil cult. They did live sacrifices to please an evil god by making followers commit suicide. When one of the followers was chosen, his survival instincts triumphed over his foolishness, twisted beliefs, and psychedelic drugs. He secretly escaped and reported to the police. The case was handed over to us. It was a very small mission, since there were no beyonders in that cult. The deity they worshipped was actually randomly thought up by their leader merely for the sake of money and satisfaction. Humanity was lost there. We only used 2 members, coupled with the support from the police, to suppress this cult. No one was off the hook. For that whistleblower, we also confirmed that he had no lingering demonic scent left on him. He was not cursed and did not suffer any mental disorders. He didn't have any personality problems or any other irregularities, nothing. Later, he got a decent advancement in his career, got married to a very good wife, had a son and a daughter. His dark past seemed far away from him. The horror and bloodshed seemed to have completely vanished. At this point, Dunn Smith gave out a laugh and said, "Yet in March this year, despite being in good financial health and having a loving wife and adorable kids, he strangled himself to death in his own office." The crimson moonlight outside the carriage window shone upon Dunn Smith. At that instant, his seemingly self-derisive smile made Klein feel unspeakably horrified. Strangled himself to death, Klein drew in a gasp of cool air silently, as if seeing his own tragic end. Even if I escaped it once, it might just be temporary. Is there any way to resolve this completely? Become a beyonder to fight it? The carriage returned to silence. Countless thoughts swelled in Klein's mind. Under an awkward silence, the carriage travelled for a long time at high speeds. Just as Klein made up his mind to consult Dunn Smith for any solutions, the carriage came to a halt. "Mr. Smith, we have reached Welsh's apartment." The carriage driver's voice was heard. "Let's get down." Dunn straightened out his black coat that reached his knees. "Oh, let me introduce beforehand. The official disguise of the expert is the most renowned spirit medium of our county." Klein suppressed his other thoughts and asked curiously, "Then what is her actual identity?" Dunn half turned his body and turned his head back. With his abstruse grey eyes he said, "A true spirit medium." A true medium. Klein repeated this description inwardly, and did not speak again. He followed Dunn Smith down the carriage. Welsh's place in Tingen was a detached house with a garden. The road outside the hollowed metal gates allowed 4 carriages to pass through at once. Street lamps lined the sides of the road every 50 meters. They looked different from the ones Klein had seen in his previous life. They were gas lamps, and the height of every lamp was about that of an adult male, so that was convenient to light the lamps. The black metal was closely pressed to the glass, forming a checkered pattern. Casting out classical paper lantern light artworks, coldness and warmth were intertwined while darkness and light coexisted. Walking along the pathway blanketed by rays from the sunset, Klein and Dunn Smith entered Welsh's rented place through the ajar metal gate. Facing the main entrance was a cemented road that led straight to a 2-floored bungalow. 2 carriages could go at once. There was a garden on the left and a lawn to the right. The pleasantly faint fragrance from the flowers mixed with the cool scent of the fresh grass made one feel happy and relaxed. As soon as he stepped in, Klein shivered and peered around. He felt that in the garden, somewhere in the lawn, on the roof, behind the swing, somewhere in a dark corner, pairs of eyes were observing him. There was clearly no one here, yet Klein felt as if he was on a crowded street. This strange contrast, this peculiar feeling tensed him up. A chill ran up his spine. Something's wrong, he couldn't help but exclaim to Dunn. Dunn's expression remained unchanged as he walked beside him and replied calmly, "Just ignore them." Since the Nitork had said so, Klein tolerated the chilling feeling of not being able to notice the perpetrator despite being followed, spied, and observed. Step by step, he arrived at the main entrance of the bungalow. "If this goes on any longer, I will go crazy." As Dunn reached out his hand to knock on the door, Klein quickly turned around. Flowers swayed in the wind, without a person in sight. "Come in, gentlemen." A seemingly ethereal voice came from inside the house. Dunn turned the doorknob, pushed the door open and said to a woman on the sofa, "Dally, any results?" The chandelier in the living room was unlit. A set of 2 leather couches surrounded a marble coffee table. On the table was a lit candle, but the light emitted a cobalt blue glow. It covered the half-enclosed living room, dining room, and kitchen in a strange, eerie hue. On the middle of the sofa sat a lady in a hooded black robe who wore blue eyeshadow and blush. An exposed silver bracelet with a hanging white crystal pendant was worn around her wrist. At the first sight of her, Klein had an inexplicable feeling. She was dressed just like a real medium. Was she stereotyping herself? Dally, the medium, with uncanny beauty, took a quick glance at Klein with her twinkling emerald eyes. She looked at Dunn Smith and said, "The original spirits have all disappeared, including the Welshers and Nunias. Right now, all these little rascals know nothing at all. Spirits, spirit medium, all the invisible things that were spying on him previously were spirits." There were so many of them. Klein removed his hat and placed it across his chest, bowing slightly as he said, "Good evening, madam." Dunn Smith sighed. "That's tricky. Dally, this is Klein Moretti. See if you can get anything out of him." The medium, Dally, shifted her gaze on to Klein immediately. She pointed at a single armchair and said, "Please, take a seat." "Thank you." Klein nodded, took a few steps over, and sat down obediently. His heart raced uncontrollably. Whether I survive, whether I get through this successfully or have my secrets exposed will all depend on whatever happens next. And the thing that made him feel the most helpless was that he had nothing to rely on. He could only place his hopes on his inherent specialness. This feeling really sucked, Klein thought bitterly. Next, Dunn sat on the 2-seater sofa opposite of Klein. Dally took out 2 thumb-sized glass bottles from her waist pouch. Her emerald eyes smiled at Klein as she said, "I need a bit of help here. After all, you are not an enemy. I can't treat you harshly. That might make you uncomfortable or put you in pain. It might even leave some serious after effects on you. I will give you some fragrances, making you feel tender and smooth, which will allow you to let loose bit by bit so that you can truly indulge in those feelings." That sounded wrong. Klein gaped as his eyes were filled with shock. Seated across him, Dunn laughed and said, "Don't be weirded out. We are different from the fellows from the Church of the Lord of Storms. Here, the ladies can also verbally tease men. In this regard, you should be able to understand. Your mother was a devout believer of the goddess. You and your brother used to attend Sunday school at church. I understand. It's just that I never thought that she would be such a Klein gestured, as he could not find the right words. He almost blurted out a direct translation for veteran driver one. Dunn curved the corners of his mouth up and said, "Don't worry. Actually, Dally seldom does this. She just wants to use these methods to calm you down. She prefers corpses over men." "You make me sound perverted," Dally interjected with a smile. She opened one of the little bottles and dripped a few drops onto the bright blue candle flame. Night vanilla, slumber flower, and chamomile, all distilled and extracted to form this aromatic floral essence. I call it amantha. It means tranquility in the Hermes language. It smells really amazing. As they chatted, the candle flame flickered, evaporating the floral essence and filling the room with its aroma. A beautifully enchanting aroma found its way into Klein's nostrils. He no longer felt tensed up. He was instantly calm as if he was gazing into the darkness of the silent night. This bottle is called the Eye of the Spirit. Barks and leaves of drago and poplar trees are sun-dried for 7 days and decocted thrice. Then, they are immersed in Lanti wine. Of course, there would be several incantations while we are at it. His daddy described the liquid. The amber substance dripped onto the cobalt blue candle flame. Upon smelling the ethereal scent of the aromatic wine, Klein noticed that the candle flame was dancing wildly. The luster of Dally's blue eyeshadow and blush shone oddly, to the extent of him seeing double. It is a great helping hand for mediumship. It is also a floral essence that is sufficiently enchanting. As Dally explained continuously, Klein felt as if her voice was coming from all around. Bewildered, Klein looked around and realized that everything was swaying and in a blur. He felt like he was shrouded by layers and layers of fog. Even his body was swaying as it phased away before he began floating and then losing his balance. Colors blended like an impressionist painting. The reds were redder, the blues were bluer, and the blacks were blacker, appearing more defined than usual. It was dreamy and hazy. Distinct murmurs from the surroundings came through as if hundreds and thousands of people who could not be seen were debating. This feels similar to the luck enhancement ritual I did before, but without the kind of madness that makes your head feel like exploding. Klein looked around and thought questioningly. At this moment, his vision was locked onto a pair of eyes that were crystal clear like emerald. On a blurry sofa sat Dally in a black robe. Eccentrically, her gaze concentrated on the tip of Klein's head. She smiled and in a gentle voice said, "Let me properly introduce myself. I am the spirit medium, Dally. I can still have rational thoughts. It's like when I was at that luck enhancement ritual and the gathering the thought crossed Klein's mind as he intentionally behaved muddled and said, Hello there. The mental worlds of humans are extremely vast. Many secrets are hidden within the mind. Look at the ocean. What we know about it is all on the superficial level. But in reality, deep in the ocean, there is a larger unseen portion. Other than islands, there is the entire ocean. There is the boundless sky that symbolizes the spiritual world. You are the spirit of your body. Not only do you know of the islands above, but you also know of the things hidden beneath the sea, as well as the entire ocean. Anything that exists leaves some traces behind. The superficial memories of the islands may be wiped out, but what is left under the sea and the entire ocean will definitely have a corresponding projection left in it. Dally went on and on, bewitching Klein. The vague surrounding winds and shadows took on similar forms. It was as though Klein's spirit was fully exposed in the form of an ocean, waiting for him to search and discover. Klein watched patiently as he churned the ocean occasionally. Then, in an airy voice, he replied, No, I can't remember, I have forgotten. He expressed his agony at just the right level. Dally tried to guide him once again, but the clear-headed Klein was unaffected. Okay, we shall end here. You may leave. 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 The airy voice lingered and Dally disappeared. The wind and shadows began calming as the ethereal smell and subtle scent of the aromatic wine became more distinct again. The colors returned to their normal state and the fuzzy feeling was no longer around. Klein's body quivered, and he found his balance again. He opened his eyes, which he had no memory of closing, and noticed that the candle with the bright blue flame was still before him. Dunn Smith was still resting comfortably on the couch. Same for Dally with the black hooded robe. Why did you use the theory that belongs to that bunch of evil madmen, the psychology alchemists? Dunn furrowed his eyebrows and stared at Dally. As Dally put away the two little bottles, she replied calmly, I think it's pretty accurate. At least, it corresponds with some of the things I've made contact with before. Without waiting for Dunn's reply, Dally shrugged and said, This tricky fellow did not leave a single trace behind. Upon hearing this, Klein heaved a huge sigh of relief. Pretentiously, he asked, Oh, it's over? What happened? It felt like I just took a nap. That was a pass, right? Thankfully, I had the luck enhancement ritual as a rehearsal. Just take it as such. Dunn interrupted him and looked at Dally. Have you examined Welch's and Neo's bodies? The corpses can tell us a lot more than you can imagine. It's such a pity that Welch and Neo had indeed committed suicide. So, the force that drove them to it is to be feared. Not a single trace was left behind. Dally stood up and pointed at the candle. I need some rest. The cobalt blue glow vanished, and the house was instantly inundated with a blurry shade of crimson. Congratulations, you can return home now. But do remember, do not reveal this incident to your loved ones. You have to promise this, Dunn said as he led Klein to the door. Surprised, Klein asked, Is there no need to examine the curses or the trails left behind by the evil spirits? Dally didn't mention anything about it, so there's no need for it, Dunn answered simply. Klein calmed down. As the thought of his previous worries came to mind, he asked hurriedly, How can I be sure that I will be free from trouble from now on? No worries. Dunn twitched his lips and said, Based on statistics of similar incidents in the past, 80% of the survivors of the incident do not experience any horrifying after effects. Yeah, this is based on what I know roughly more or less. Then there's still 1/5 of those poor souls. Klein did not dare to try his luck. Then you can consider joining us as a civilian staff. This way, even if there are any precursors, we can discover it in time, Dunn said casually as he approached the carriage. Or simply become a beyonder. After all, we are not nannies. We can't babysit you all day long and even watch what you do with women. Can I? Klein questioned the statement. Of course, he did not expect much. After all, how was it even possible to be a part of the Nitalks so easily and obtain the power of the Beyonders? That was the power of the Beyonders. Dunn paused and turned his head sideways to look at him. It's not that you can't, it depends. What? The transition in his words shocked Klein. Klein stared blankly beside the carriage before answering. Really? Who are you kidding? Is it so easy to become a beyonder? Dunn laughed lightly. His grey eyes were hidden in the shadow of the carriage. You don't believe me, huh? Actually, when you become a talk you lose a lot. For instance, freedom. Even if we don't talk about this now, there is another issue. Firstly, you are not a member of the clergy, nor a devotee. You can't pick whatever you want or choose the safest approach. And secondly, Dunn held on to the handle and hopped onto the carriage as he went on. Among the cases that we as the mandated punisher, the machinery hive mind, and other judiciaries have to deal with annually, a quarter of them were the result of beyonders who lost control. A quarter beyonders who lost control. Klein was dumbfounded. Just then, Dunn turned slightly. His grey eyes were deep. With no sign of a smile, he continued, and among the quarter of cases, a large number of them are our teammates. A wave of tumultuous emotions rose up in Klein's heart after he heard Dunn. Instinctively, he uttered, why? The beyonders have serious hidden dangers. So much so that the church's internal judiciary and the beyonders, who dealt with bizarre phenomenon, are also prone to problems. Dunn stepped into the carriage and sat back in his seat. His expression and tone remained the same. This is not something that you need to understand. Neither is it something you can understand, unless you become one of us. Klein was struck dumb for a moment, after which he sat down and questioned in a tone that was half dubious and half joking. If I don't come to understand, how is it possible for me to make a decision to join? And not joining would mean Klein could not understand. This would end in a deadlock. Dunn Smith took out the pipe once again, placed it against his nose, and took a whiff. You probably misunderstood. A civilian staff member is also one of us. In other words, as long as I become one of your civilian staff members, I will be able to understand the relevant secrets, figure out the hidden dangers that plague beyonders, and the dangers that may be encountered, as well as consider whether I want to become a beyonder later. Klein reorganized his thoughts and paraphrased what Dunn had shared. Dunn smiled and said, yes, that is the case, except for one point. You cannot simply become a beyonder just because you want to, because every church will be equally strict in this aspect. It would be odd if the churches were not strict. Klein lampooned silently, as he added with a more intense tone coupled with stronger body language. What about civilian staff members? This should be quite strict as well, right? There shouldn't be any problems if it's you, said Dunn with half-closed eyelids as he whiffed the pipe with partially relaxed countenance. However, he did not ignite it. Why? Klein asked as he was once again grappled by doubt. At the same time, he jested inwardly. So my uniqueness and halo as a transmigrator are akin to the fireflies in the night, ever so bright and outstanding? Dunn opened his half-closed eyelids, his silver-colored eyes reflecting the same tranquility as before. First, you managed to survive without our help in such a situation. Certain exceptional qualities are not present in others. For instance, luck. Lucky people are often welcomed. Seeing that Klein's expression had turned blank, Dunn smiled slightly. All right, just treat this as a humorous statement. Second, you're a graduate of the history department from Troy University. This is something we urgently need. Although a believer of the Lord of the Storms, Leomy perceives women in a way that is loathsome, his views regarding society, humanities, economics, and politics remain incisive. He said before that talents are key to maintaining a competitive advantage and positive development, a point that I very much agree with. Noticing that Klein was slightly furrowing his eyebrows, Dunn casually explained, you should be able to imagine that we often encounter documents and objects from the 4th epoch or earlier. Many cults and heretics have tried to gain power from these things. Sometimes, they themselves can lead to strange and terrible things. Except for the beyonders in special fields, most of us are not good with our studies, or have passed that age. Having said that, Dunn Smith pointed to his own head, and the corner of his mouth turned up slightly as if he was mocking himself. He then said, nose dry, boring knowledge always puts us to sleep. Even the sleepless can't help it. In the past, we would cooperate with historians or archaeologists, but this posed the risk of exposing secrets. And mishaps might befall on these otherwise uninvolved professors and associate professors. Thus, the addition of a professional in our ranks is hard to refuse. Klein nodded lightly and accepted Dunn's explanation. With his thoughts all over the place, he asked, then why don't you directly, Groom 1? Dunn continued, this brings me to the third point, which is also the final and most important point. You've already been through a similar ordeal, so inviting you doesn't violate the confidentiality clause. With regard to developing others, I will bear the responsibility of exposure if it fails. Most of our team members, our civilian staff members, come from within the church. After Klein finished listening silently, he asked curiously, why are you so strict about maintaining confidentiality? Wouldn't spreading the news publicly to more people and increasing awareness lessen the chances of a similar mistake from happening again? The greatest fear stems from the fear of the unknown. We can make the unknown become known. No, humanity's stupidity is beyond your imagination. It actually leads to more people emulating these acts, creating more chaos and more severe incidents. Dunn Smith shook his head and replied. Klein acknowledged as he replied in enlightenment, the only lesson that humans can learn from history is that humans do not gain any lessons from history. And they're always repeating the same tragedies. That famous quote from Emperor Cell is indeed filled with much philosophical meaning, agreed Dunn. Emperor Cell said that. This transmigrator senior really did not give the latecomers any chance to posture. Klein did not know how to follow up on Dunn's words. Dunn turned his head and gazed out of the horse carriage. The dim yellowish light of the street lamps intertwined to display the splendor of civilization. There is a similar discourse within the judiciary of the major churches. This may be the main reason for the strict confidentiality and the prohibition of ordinary people from knowing. What is it? Klein asked as his interest was piqued, pleasure that he seemed to be spying on secrets. Dunn turned his head. His facial muscles pulled themselves so slightly that it was hardly visible. Faith and fear bring troubles. More faith and more fear bring more troubles, until everything is destroyed. After he said that, Dunn sighed. Besides praying for the blessings and help from gods, humans can't solve their real major problems. Faith and fear bring troubles. More faith and more fear bring more troubles, Klein recited silently, but he could not fully understand it. What followed next was the fear of uncertainty that came from the unknown. It was like the dark shadows formed by the street lights outside. In the darkness without light, it appeared as though there were pairs of caddis-looking eyes and wide-open mouths. As the horse galloped vigorously and nimbly while the wheels of the horse carriage reeled on ahead with Iron Cross Street in sight, Dunn broke the silence suddenly and formally invited Klein. "Would you like to join us as a civilian staff member?" In Klein's mind, multiple thoughts surfaced, making him indecisive. He contemplated and asked, "Can I have some time to consider?" Since this matter had serious implications, he could not hastily and recklessly make a decision. "No problem, just give me a reply before Sunday," Dunn nodded and added. "Of course, remember to keep this a secret and don't disclose the information regarding Welsh to anyone, including your brother and sister. Once this is violated, it'll not only bring them trouble, but you might also have to attend a special court." "Okay," Klein answered gravely. The carriage was once again plunged into silence. Seeing that they were nearing Iron Cross Street and that he was almost reaching home, Klein suddenly thought of a question. He hesitated for a few seconds before asking, "Mr. Smith, what kind of salary and benefits do civilian staff get?" This was a serious question. Taken aback momentarily, Dunn smiled instantly and answered, "There's no need for you to worry about this issue. Our funds are guaranteed by the church and the police department. For newly registered civilian staffs, the weekly salaries are placed at £2.10 solly. There is an additional £10 compensation for the risk and confidentiality. All of this will add up to a total of £3. This is hardly worse than a confirmed university lecturer. After which, your salary will gradually rise according to your experience and contributions. As for civilian staff members, the contract is generally 5 years. After 5 years, you can quit normally if you're no longer willing to stay. You only have to sign a lifetime confidentiality agreement and you're not allowed to leave Tingen until permission is given. If you want to move to another city, the first thing you must do is register with the local NITORC. By the way, there are no weekends and you can only work in shifts. At any point in time, there should be 3 civilian staffs on duty, and if you wish to go to the south or decide for a vacation, you'll need to arrange it with your colleagues." Just as Dunn finished speaking, the horse carriage pulled to a stop and the apartment building where Klein and his siblings resided and appeared on the side. "I get it now." Klein turned around and walked down the horse carriage. He stopped at the side and asked, "By the way, Mr. Smith, where do I find you after I've come to my decision?" Dunn gave a deep and low-throaty laugh before saying, "Go to the town pub at Bezique Street and find their boss, right? Tell him that you want to hire a small mercenary squad for a mission." "Huh?" Klein asked confusedly. "Our location is confidential too. Before you agree to become one of us, I can't tell you directly." "All right, Mr. Klein Moretti, I wish you a good dream tonight as well," Dunn smiled as he said. Klein took off his hat and saluted, watching as the pace of the departing horse carriage gradually sped up. He took out his pocket watch. Click, he pressed it open and saw that it was only a little past 4 in the morning. The street was filled with a relaxing, cool breeze. A dim yellowish light from the street lamps illuminated the surroundings. Klein drew a deep breath and took in the deep silence of the night around him. The busiest and noisiest district in the day could be so lifeless and quiet at night. This was in stark contrast to the silent observations and medium scenes in Welsh's residence. It was only then that Klein realized that the back of his linen shirt was unknowingly drenched in sweat, cold and clammy. "Phew, I finally got through the round with the medium." Klein let out a foul breath. He slowly turned around and enjoyed the cool breeze and tranquility of the night, while walking closer and closer to the apartment building's door. He took out his keys, inserted the correct one in and turned it gently, allowing the crimson-mixed darkness to expand with the creaking sound of the opened door. Walking on the staircase without a single person in sight and taking in the cold air, Klein had an inexplicable and amazing feeling. It felt like he had a few more hours than others. This caused him to hasten his pace. In a similar state of mind, he opened the door to his room, and before he even stepped inside, he saw a silhouette sitting silently in front of his desk. It had reddish black hair, bright brown eyes, and a delicate, pretty face. Undoubtedly, she was Melissa Moretti. "Klein, where did you go?" Melissa asked curiously as she relaxed her eyebrows. Without waiting for Klein's reply, she added, "Just now, I got up to go to the bathroom and realized you weren't home." It was as if she wanted to know everything clearly. From the causes and effects of the matter to the underlying logic. With great experience at lying to his parents, Klein's brain took a spin before he gave a bitter smile and calmly replied, "I couldn't fall asleep again after I woke up. Instead of wasting time, I decided that I should train my body. So I went out to run a few rounds. Look at my sweat." He took off his jacket and half-turned his body, pointing to his back. Melissa stood up, took a glance half-heartedly and deliberated for a few moments before saying, "Honestly speaking, Klein, you don't have to stress yourself out. I'm sure you can pass the interview to Tingen University. Even if you can't, if you can still find better ones." "I haven't even thought about the interview." Klein nodded his head and said, "I understand." He did not mention the offer that he had gotten because he had not decided whether he wanted to join them or not. Staring at Klein intensely, Melissa suddenly turned around and trotted into the interior of the house. She took out an object that resembled a tortoise. It was comprised of items like gears, rusted iron, torsion springs and ordinary springs. After quickly tightening the torsion spring, Melissa placed the object on the desk. Dum, dum, dum. The tortoise moved and jumped with a rhythm that could pull anyone's attention. Whenever I feel irritated, I feel much better seeing this tortoise move. I've been doing this very often recently and it's very effective. Klein, give it a try, invited Melissa as her eyes brightened. Klein did not turn down his sister's goodwill. He approached the tortoise and waited for it to stop before laughing. He said, "Simplicity and regularity can indeed help relaxation." Without waiting for Melissa's reply, Klein pointed to the tortoise and casually asked, "Did you make this yourself?" "When did you make this? Why wasn't I aware of it?" "I made use of unwanted materials from school and things picked up from the streets to make this." "It was only finished 2 days ago," Melissa said in her usual tone, the side of her lips upturned a few more degrees. "That's impressive," Klein praised it sincerely. As a boy with poor skills in machine assembly, he encountered great difficulties even assembling a 4-wheel toy car as a child. With her chin slightly raised and her eyes slightly bent, Melissa calmly replied, "It was okay." Being overly humble is a bad trait. Klein smiled slightly and continued. This is a tortoise, right? Instantly, the atmosphere in the room took a great plunge, leaving behind an air of graveness for a while. Then, Melissa faintly replied with a voice that seemed enigmatic like the crimson veil, it's a puppet. Puppet. Klein gave an awkward smile, and tried to forcefully explain, the problem lies in the materials, they're too rudimentary. Following that, he tried to change the topic and said, why would you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night? Isn't there a toilet here? Don't you always sleep till dawn? Melissa was taken aback momentarily. It was only after a few seconds, before she opened her mouth, prepared to explain. At that moment, an intense sound of digestion sounded from her thoraco-abdominal one area. To go get some more sleep. Bang! She grabbed her tortoise-like puppet, trotted to the interior of the house, and closed the door to her room. Last night's dinner was too good. She ate too much and now her stomach is having trouble digesting it. Klein shook his head as he smiled, slowly walking towards his desk. He sat down soundlessly, silently pondering Dunn Smith's invitation as the crimson red moon emerged from behind the dark clouds. Being an ad hoc civilian staff member had its apparent disadvantages. With me being a transmigrator, the fool, initiator of the mysterious gathering, and the multiple secrets I have, it will be risky to be under the noses of the Church of the Evernight Goddesses team that specializes in dealing with matters regarding the Beyonders. As long as I joined Dunn Smith and his team, I would certainly aim to become a Beyonder. I could then cover up the benefits gained from the gathering. Yet, becoming a formal member would entail many restrictions on my freedom, like how a civilian staff has to report his leaving of Tingen. No longer would I be able to go wherever I want or do whatever I want. I would miss many opportunities. The Nighthawks are a strict organization. Once a mission is given, I can only wait for the arrangements and accept orders. There is no room for rejection. Beyond this of the risk of losing control. Having all the disadvantages listed out one by one, Klein turned to considering the necessities and advantages. Judging from the situation of the luck enhancement ritual, I'm not one of the 80% of lucky people. In the future, there is bound to be some bizarre event happening to me, increasing the dangers I face. Only by becoming one of the Beyonders or by joining the Nighthawks can I be equipped with the ability to resist. The wish to become a Beyonder cannot be solely reliant on the gathering. The potion formula is not a major problem, but where can I find the corresponding materials? How am I to obtain and concoct them? Not forgetting the nous of daily practice, I'm faced with serious obstacles. It is just not possible for me to consult justice and the hanged man on every matter and exchange every object with them. This would not only hurt the image of the fool and arouse their suspicions, but there will also be inadequate time to communicate on such trivial issues. Similarly, I am unable to produce anything that can pique their interest. Besides, more materials would more often than not leave behind the trail of my real identity. Then, online disputes would effectively be transformed into offline conflicts, bringing about immense troubles. By joining the Nighthawks, there would definitely be contact with the common knowledge of the world of mystery and relevant channels. This can sufficiently accumulate into a corresponding social circle and can be used as leverage. Only then can I initiate the gathering and in turn gain the greatest benefits from justice and the hanged man. In reality, the gains can feed back into reality, allowing me to obtain more resources and form a virtuous cycle. Of course, I could also go to an organization that is suppressed by the various churches such as the psychology alchemists mentioned by Dunn and join them. Yet I'd also lose my freedom and be in a constant state of fear and anxiety. However, more importantly, I have no idea where to look for them. Even if I managed to gain the corresponding information from the hanged man, such rash contact with them could endanger my life. Becoming a civilian staff leaves opportunity for a buffer and exit. The inferior recluse hides away in the wild, the superior, the crowd. Perhaps the identity as an Nighthawk can be a better cover. In the future, when I become one of the top authorities of the tribunal, who would imagine that I am a heretic, the head of the secret organization who is working behind the scenes? As the first rays of the morning sun shone, the crimson disappeared. Gazing at the golden light on the horizons of the sky, Klein made up his mind. He would find Dunn Smith today and become part of the Nighthawk civilian staff. At this moment, Militia, who had gotten out of bed again, had pushed open the door to the room. She was surprised to see her brother stretching in an unglamorous manner. You didn't sleep? I was thinking through some things. Klein smiled, feeling relaxed. Melissa thought for a moment and said, whenever I encounter problems, I'll list out both the pros and cons one by one and compare them. After that, I would be able to get a hint of what I should do next. That's a good habit. I did that too, Klein smiled and replied. Melissa's countenance was relaxed, and she did not add more. Holding a yellowish sheet of paper and her toiletries, she headed to the bathroom. Not in a hurry to leave after he finished his breakfast and his sister's departure, Klein took a good nap. Based on what he knew, nearly all the pubs were closed in the morning. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he smoothed the pleats of his silk hat and handkerchief using a small brush. He also removed the dirt to re-establish the tidiness. Thereafter, he wore a suit of formal clothing, just like he was going for an interview. Bezique Street was a little far, and Klein was afraid that he would miss the working hours of the Nighthawk. Therefore, he did not walk there, but instead waited for public horse carriage at Iron Cross Street. In the Loam Kingdom, public horse carriages were placed under 2 categories without track and with track. The former consisted of a carriage drawn by 2 horses and could sit approximately 20 people while taking into account the top of the carriage. Only a general route existed, without specific stations. It had flexible operations and could be hailed anywhere unless it was full. The latter was operated by the Orbital Carriage Company. First, a rail-like service device was laid on the main street. The horses would move on the inner lane while the wheels ran on the tracks, making it easier and more labor-saving. This could thus pull a bigger double-decker carriage that sat nearly 50 passengers. However, the only problem was that the route and stations were fixed, making many places inaccessible. After 10 minutes, the sound of the wheels hitting the tracks approached from a distance. A double-decker horse carriage stopped in front of the station at Iron Cross Street. To Bezique Street, Klein said to the carriage driver. You have to transfer at Champagne Street, but when you get there, it takes about 10 minutes to walk to Bezique Street, explained the carriage driver to Klein, with regards to the route. Let's go to Champagne Street then. Klein nodded in approval. It's more than 4 kilometers, 4 pence, said a young man with a fair and clean face, as he extended his hand. He was a worker responsible for money collection. Okay. Klein fished out 4 copper coins from his pocket and handed it to the other party. He walked up to the carriage and found that there were not many passengers. Even on the first floor, there were a few empty seats. I only have 3 pence on me now, so I can only walk when I go back. Klein pressed his hat down and sat down firmly. On this floor, the men and women were mostly well dressed, although there were a few clothed in their work clothes, leisurely reading newspapers. Almost no one spoke, and it was quite quiet. Klein shut his eyes and recharged his strength, oblivious to the coming and going of passengers around him. Station after station passed until he finally heard the few words, Champagne Street. After alighting the horse carriage, he inquired along the way and soon reached Bezique Street, where he saw the pub with the brownish-yellow hound logo. Klein reached out his right hand and gave a forceful push. The heavy door gradually opened, inundating him with a wave of uproarious noises and an impetuous heat wave. Although it was still afternoon, there were already many customers in the pub. Some were temporary workers, looking for opportunities here, waiting to be hired. Others were simply idling around, numbing themselves with alcohol. The pub was dimly lit. In the center, there were 2 large iron cages with a third of its bottom sinking deep into the ground without any gaps. People held wooden wine cups and surrounded it, sometimes discussing loudly while laughing, sometimes cursing loudly. Giving a curious glance, Klein found 2 dogs caged inside. One was black and white, similar to the husky found on Earth. The other was wholly black, with shiny fur, making it look healthy and fierce. Do you want to bet? Doug has won 8 games in a row, said a little man wearing a brown beret, as he neared Klein and pointed to the black dog. Bet? Taken aback at first, Klein regained his senses immediately. Dog fighting. When he was at Coy University, those aristocratic and wealthy students would always ask him contemptuously and curiously if the boorish workers and unemployed hooligans enjoyed participating in boxing and gambling at the pubs. Besides being able to gamble on boxing and card games, didn't it also include cruel and bloody activities like cockfighting, dog fighting, and others? The short man smirked. Mister, we're civilized people. We don't engage in such unglamorous activities. Having said that, he whispered, besides, laws were introduced to ban these things last year. Then what are you all betting on? Asked Klein curiously. The bet the hunter. Just as the short man finished his sentence, a resounding cacophony sounded. He turned his head, waved his hands excitedly, and said, You can't place a bet for this round as it has started. Wait for the next one then. Upon hearing that, Klein tipped his toes, lifted his head, and looked as far as he could. He saw 2 strong men each dragging a sack, coming to the side of the iron cage and opening the prison door. They then dumped the contents of the sack into the cage. They were grey and disgusting animals. Klein tried to identify them carefully before realizing that they were rats. Hundreds of rats. As the iron cage was deep underground without any gaps, the rats moved in all directions but could not find a way out. Right then, just as the door of the cage was closed, the chain of the 2 dogs were untied. Woof! The black dog pounced ahead and killed the rat in one bite. The black and white dog was dazed at first before it started playing excitedly with the rats. The surrounding people either raised their wine cups and intensified their gaze or shouted loudly, Bite it! Kill it! Doug, mutter *** king rat baiting with dogs. Klein regained his senses and the corner of his mouth twitched unceasingly. The objective of the gamble is to determine which dog can catch more rats. Perhaps, one can even bet on the specific number of rats caught. No wonder there were people purchasing live rats at Iron Cross Street. That's really unique. Klein shook his head, laughing as he backtracked, and circled along the edge of the alcoholic customers, and reached the front of the bar. New here, said the bartender as he spared Klein a glance while wiping the cups. He continued, 1 cup of rye beer is a penny. NMAT beer, costs 2 pence, 4 pence for Southville beer, or do you want a cup of purely brewed malt Lanty? I came here for Mr. Wright, said Klein directly and bluntly. The bartender whistled and shouted to the side, Old man, someone is looking for you. Oh, who? A vague voice sounded, and an intoxicated old man stood up from behind the bar. He rubbed his eyes, shifted his gaze to Klein and asked, Lad, were you looking for me? Mr. Wright, I would like to hire a small mercenary squad for a mission, replied Klein, according to what Dunn had instructed. A small mercenary squad? Are you living in an adventure story? This hasn't been around for a long time, the bartender interrupted and smiled. Wright went silent for a few seconds before saying, Who told you to look for it here? Dunn Smith, replied Klein in all honesty. Instantly, Wright broke out in a chuckle and replied, I see. Actually, the small mercenary squad still exists. It's just in another form, with a more contemporary name. You can find it on the 2nd floor of No. 36 Charlton Street. Thank you, thanked Klein sincerely before he turned and squeezed out of the pub. Before he went out the pub, the alcoholic customers who surrounded him suddenly quieted down, as they murmured, Doug was actually defeated. Defeated? Klein smiled and shook his head. Then he left quickly and found his way to the nearby Zoeterland Street after asking around. 30, 32, 34 here, he counted the house numbers and walked into the stairwell. Going around the corner and slowly climbing up the stairs, he saw the vertical sign with the current name of the so-called small mercenary squad. Blackthorn Security Company. Blackthorn Security Company. Upon seeing the signboard, Klein felt surprised yet found it reasonable. Man, what do I say about this? He shook his head and laughed before walking up the steps and knocking gently on the half-closed door with his right hand. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed slowly but rhythmically, but there was no response. Only a faint sputtering sound could be heard. Knock, 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 Klein repeated, only to be met with the same outcome. He switched to pushing the door, making the gap larger as he stared inside a classic sofa which might have been for serving guests, a soft fabric armchair, and a burly wood coffee table. There was a girl with brown hair behind the table right across with her head drooped. Even though security company is just a guise, isn't this just too unprofessional? How long has this place been out of business? Right, you guys don't need any business. Klein drew closer as he complained silently and knocked on the table just beside the girl's ear. Knock, knock. The brown-haired girl sat up immediately and swiftly took the newspaper in front of her, covering her face. Tingen City Honest Paper Niece named Klein silently read the title of the page facing him. The steam train service, Soaring Express, that directly reaches Constant City is starting operations today. Oh come on, when will there be one that goes straight to Brindisi Bay? I really don't want to take the ship there again. It's too awful. Really awful. Hey, who are you? The girl with brown hair read pretentiously and gave her opinion. As she spoke, she lowered the newspaper and revealed her bright forehead and light brown eyes, looking at Klein with a fawning and startled look. Hello, I am Klein Moretti, and I am here at the invitation of Dunn Smith, Klein said as he took down his hat to his chest and bowed slightly. The brown-haired girl looked to be in her early 20s. She wore a light green, Lowen-styled dress. She was set off with beautiful laces on her sleeves, collar, and chest. The captain, all right, wait here for a moment. I'll go get him. The girl scurried up and went into the room beside her. She didn't even serve a cup of water or anything. The level of service awareness is worrying. Klein smiled faintly as he waited at his spot. After 2 to 3 minutes, the brown-haired girl opened the door and came out. She said with a sweet smile, Mr. Moretti, please follow me. The captain is on watch at the Kniz Gate and is unable to leave at the moment. Okay, Klein quickly followed behind. In his mind, he pondered to himself. Kniz Gate, what could that be? Going through the partition, the first thing he saw was a small corridor with only 3 offices on each side. Some of these offices were locked tight, while some were opened, revealing someone on the inside who typed non-stop on a heavy mechanical typewriter. At a glance, Klein noticed a familiar figure, the young officer that had investigated his apartment, the one with the black hair and blue eye and romantic vibe of a poet. He was not in official wear. His white-collared shirt was not tucked in, making for quite an unruly appearance. Perhaps he really is a poet. Klein nodded in greeting and was greeted with a smile. The brown-haired girl pushed open the left office door at the end of the room and pointed inside, chirping, we still have to go down a few levels. This office had no furniture in place, only a greyish-white stone staircase that extended downwards. The 2 sides of the stairs were lit up by gas lamps. The stable glow dispelled the darkness and gave a sense of harmony. The brown-haired girl walked in front, staring at her feet while walking carefully. Although I walk here often, I am still constantly afraid of falling down, tumbling down like a barrel. You don't know, Leonard did such a folly. On the first day of becoming a sleepless, the first day where he had not mastered his new powers, he tried to rush down the flight of stairs. And he became a cartwheel. Ha ha, it was hilarious, if you think about it. Oh yes, it was the guy that greeted you just now. This was about 3 years ago. Speaking of which, I have been with the Nighthawks for 5 years. I was only 17 when I joined. The girl watched her steps as she spoke. Suddenly, she smacked her forehead and said, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Roseanne. My father was a member of the Nighthawks, who sacrificed himself in an accident 5 years ago. I suppose we are colleagues from now on. Yeah, colleague is the right word. We are not teammates, since we are not beyonders. I hope to have the honor, but still it depends on what Mr. Smith has to say, Klein said as he sized up the enclosed surroundings. He felt that they were going underground. Dampness seeped out from the stone walls, dispelling the summer heat. Don't worry, the fact that you came so far means the captain has agreed. I've always been a little afraid of him, even though he is amiable, a fatherly figure. I don't know why, but I'm still afraid. Roseanne spoke as though there was a piece of sweet in her throat. Klein answered humorously, isn't being afraid of a father normal? True, Roseanne said as she held the wall around the bend. As they spoke, the 2 finished walking down the stairs and reached the stone-paved floor. It was a long aisle. Both sides of the walls were mounted with gas lamps surrounded by metal gratings. Klein and Roseanne's shadows were elongated under the illumination. Klein keenly noticed that there was a dark sacred emblem every few meters, the symbol of the Evernight goddess. A deep black background dotted with sparkling embellishments, as they clustered precisely half the crimson moon. These emblems did not seem special, but walking between them gave Klein a sense of serenity. Roseanne also stopped talking, unlike her previous talkative state. Before long, an intersection appeared up front. Roseanne briefly introduced. The path to the left will lead to the St. Selena Cathedral. To the right are the armory, storeroom, and archives. And straight ahead is the Kniz Gate. St. Selena Cathedral. Then, Zhaoplan Street is just behind Red Moonlight Street. Klein was a little stunned. St. Selena Cathedral of Red Moonlight Street was the headquarters of the Church of the Evernight Goddess in Tingen, a sacred ground where local followers yearned to visit. Along with Holy Numeric's Cathedral of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery in the suburbs, and the River and Sea Cathedral of the Church of the Lord of Storms in North Tingen. They sustained the religious circles in Tingen City and its affiliated towns and villages. Aware that his status made it unsuitable for him to ask more, Klein only listened silently. They passed the intersection and moved straight ahead. In less than a minute, a black iron split gate carved with 7 sacred emblems were seen. It stood there, heavy, cold and domineering, like a giant guarding in the darkness. Kniz Gate, Roseanne reminded him and pointed at the room beside them, saying, Captain is inside. Go on in by yourself. All right, thank you, Klein replied politely. The room Roseanne was referring to was just in front of Kniz Gate. The windows were opened, revealing the lit room inside. Klein took a deep breath to calm himself. Knock, 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 come in, he heard Dunn Smith's deep and amiable voice. Klein opened the unlatched door gently. There was only a table and 4 chairs inside. Dunn Smith, with his high hairline, who was wearing the black coat from the previous night, plus a gold watch chain around his chest, was reading the newspaper leisurely. Come and have a seat. Have you decided? Are you certain you want to join us? Dunn smiled and asked as he put down the newspaper. Klein removed his hat and bowed, then he sat beside the table and said, Yes, I am certain. Then take a look at this deed, hey. People like to call it a contract now. Dunn pulled out the table drawer and took out 2 contract copies. There were not many clauses, and most of them had been mentioned by Dunn Smith. The emphasis was on the confidential clause. Violators were tried in the tribunal courts of the Church of the Evernight Goddess instead of the kingdom's courts. It was akin to how soldiers and officers were sent to court-martial for trials. A 5-year contract, £2 and 10 solly for weekly wages, 10 solly as compensation for the risk and confidentiality. Klein read through it and answered resolutely, I've no problem with it. Then sign it, Dunn said as he pointed to the dark red fountain pen and ink. Klein used a piece of waste paper to try out the pen before drawing a breath. He signed on both contracts with his name, Klein Mulready. As he did not have a stamp yet, he could only use his thumbprint. Dunn received the contract, took out a stamp from the drawer, and stamped on the end of the contract and a few key parts. With that done, he stood up and returned the contract with one hand, and reached for Klein with the other, saying, Welcome, from now on, you are one of us. And please note that the contract is confidential as well. Klein stood up as well. He received the contract, shook his hand, and said, So, I shall be addressing you as captain. Yes, Dunn's greyish eyes seemed especially deep in the dim surroundings. After shaking hands, they sat down. Klein glanced at the stamp on the contract. It read, Nithawk Squad, Tingen City, our county, Loong Kingdom. I can't believe you guys would use the name Blackthorn Security Company as a disguise, he laughed and said. Actually, we have other signboards. Dunn pulled out a piece of paper from the drawer. It was stamped with the stamps of the city government and the police department. The content were as follows: 7th Unit, Special Operations Department, our county police, Loong Kingdom. The first 4 units are the regular police responsible for general security, like the VIP Protection Unit and Key Installations Protection Unit. And from Unit 5 onwards are the ones dealing with supernatural incidents in each city. Our unit is responsible for incidents related to the followers of Evernight Goddess in Tingen. If there are different types of followers, then we divide the area accordingly. We are mainly in charge of places like the North, West and the Golden Indus region. Dunn briefly introduced, Unit 6 of the Mandated Punisher Squad under the Church of the Lord of Storms is in charge of the Pier region, the East, and the South. The university area and the suburbs are under Unit 5, which is the Machinery Hive Mind Squad in Tingen. Right. Klein had no questions about it. He then laughed. What happens if someone really comes here due to the Blackthorn Security Company, Signboard, and requests for our services? We'll take those requests. Why shouldn't we? As long as it doesn't affect our daily operations, Dunn said slowly and humorously. Any earnings will be considered additional bonuses, so our members are quite willing to take those jobs. Anyway, the market for trivial and troublesome matters such as finding dogs and cats have been monopolized by private detectives. So how many people are there in this Nithawk squad? Klein asked since they were on this topic. There aren't many supernatural incidents, so there are even fewer beyonders. There are only 6 formal members of the Nithawks in the entire Tingen city, including me. Hey, as for civilian staff, there are 6 including you. Klein nodded his head, and eventually asked the question that he was most concerned about. So, Captain, what do you mean by beyonders losing control? Why did it happen? Upon hearing Klein's question, Dunn looked out of the window toward the corridor that led to Kenneth Gate. He took out his pipe, stuffed it with some tobacco and mint leaves, and held it to his nose. He took a deep whiff as his voice turned reflective and drifting. Only at home can I enjoy the beautiful flavors of tobacco mixed with mint leaves without any worries. Klein, do you know about the creation myth? Of course, when I received primary education during Sunday school, we learned to read using the Revelation of Evernight. Among them, the Book of Wisdom and the letters from the saints mentioned the myth of creation. Klein attempted to recall via the memory fragments of the original Klein. He slowed down his tempo and said, the Creator awoke from chaos and shattered the darkness, creating the first ray of light. He then fused himself completely into the universe and made up all of existence. His body became the land and stars. One of his eyes became the sun, while the other became the crimson moon. Some of his blood rushed into the seas and rivers, nourishing and nurturing lives. Klein subconsciously paused when he said that. Partially, it was because the relevant memories were a blur and that the creation myth was very similar to the Chinese creation myth of Pang. The imaginations of people from different worlds shared something in common on their myths and legends. Noticing that Klein was having trouble, Dunn smiled and added, his lungs turned into the elves, his heart turned into the giants, his liver turned into the treants, his brain turned into the dragons, his kidneys turned into the feather serpents, his hair turned into the phoenixes, his ears turned into the demonic wolves, his mouth and teeth turned into the mutants, and his remaining bodily fluids turned into the sea monsters, of which the essence was Naga. His stomach, his small and large intestines, and the evil parts of his body turned into devils, evil spirits and various kinds of unknown maleficent existences. His spirit became the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of the storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. His wisdom gave birth to humanity. That was the first epoch, the Chaos Epoch. Klein finished the last sentence for Dunn, but he found it funny and ridiculous. As a keyboard folklorist, it was the first time he came into contact with a creation myth that was arranged in such great detail. It was so detailed that almost every prominent race corresponded to a particular body part of the Creator. It's like a children's song with children sitting in a row and eating fruit. Furthermore, it was not only mentioned in the canon of the Evernight Goddess. The churches of the Lord of Storms and God of Steam and Machinery also had similar descriptions. None of them alleviated themselves or devalued the other gods. This either means that the creation myth is real, or hints that the few churches had undergone a long period of strife before compromising before the 5th epoch. With this in mind, Klein suddenly had another question. He asked with a frown, it feels problematic. Why are the eternal blazing sun, Lord of Storms, and God of knowledge and wisdom born directly from the Creator's spirit, while the goddess isn't? In the revelation of Evernight's prehistorical records, the Evernight Goddess had only awoken at the end of the 2nd epoch. Together with the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and other gods, she blessed and helped humanity survive the cataclysm. It was also known as the 3rd epoch, the cataclysm epoch. It was during that time that Mother Earth and the God of War appeared as well. As for the God of Steam and Machinery, whose original name was the God of Craftsmanship, he was born only in the 4th epoch. In that sense, the standing among the gods seemed self-evident. The ones who were more ancient was more orthodox. It was extremely clear. This also troubled the believers of the Evernight Goddess. Dunn Smith held his pipe with another hand, and instead of answering, he returned with a question, repeat the goddess's full title. Klein immediately felt like he had stabbed himself with a knife. He racked his brains and tried his best to recall. The Ebonite goddess is nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity. She is also the Lady of Crimson, the Mother of the Secrets, the Empress of Disaster and Horror, Mistress of Calm and Silence. Thankfully, Klein's mother was a devout believer of the Ebonite goddess. When she was still alive, she would recite this every evening at dinner. Even though the memories of the original Klein had fragmented, not all was lost. What does the Lady of Crimson symbolize? Dunn asked with a guiding tone. The red moon. The moment Klein answered, he immediately understood. Then which part of the Creator did the red moon come from? Asked Dunn with a smile. A single eye. Klein and Dunn smiled at each other. This was no way less impressive than the Lord of Storms, who was formed from a third of the Creator's spirit. As for the churches of Mother Earth and the God of War, they likely had similar explanations. However, the God of Steam and Machinery had been born too late to find a reason. Thus, their church had been weak in the past 1,000+ years. It was only with the invention of the steam engine that they seized the opportunity to truly be on par with the other gods. Dunn stroked his pipe gently. Humanity was born out of the wisdom of the Creator, so we have clever and extraordinary brains, but lack other magical powers. However, from the creation myth, we can form a simple but clear conclusion. Everything stems from the same origin. Stems from the same origin, Klein repeated the last few words. According to this conclusion, humans who were protected by the gods were able to resist the giants, devils, and the mutants. Gradually, they figured out means to obtain the power of the Beyonders. That is by using the corresponding parts of the evil spirits, dragons, monsters, magical trees, flowers, or crystals and combining them with other materials to form potions. By consuming and absorbing the potion, one will gain different powers. This is common knowledge among mysticism studies. Dunn did not elaborate in detail and only gave a brief introduction. In this process, our ancestors relied on painful lessons to discover that if they were to consume high-grade or extraordinary potions, it would easily lead to tragic consequences. There are 3 possible outcomes. Which 3? Pressed Klein curiously. First, mental death and the complete breakdown of the body. Every piece of flesh would become a terrifying monster. Second, their personality will be changed by the powers contained in the potion. They will turn cold, sensitive, irascible, cruel, and indifferent. Third, well Dunn put down his pipe and picked up a porcelain cup and took a sip. Thermo coffee from the Paz River Valley is bitter, but very fragrant. It leaves a splendid aftertaste. Do you want one? I prefer coffee from the Fenner Potter Plateau. Of course, I have only drank it a few times at Welsh's place. Klein politely declined. What's the third outcome? Mental disorder, turning crazy on the spot, becoming more devilish than the devil. This is what it means by losing control. Dunn emphasized the words, losing control. Without waiting for Klein to say a word, he put down his coffee cup and continued, after a long period of experimentation and exploration, together with the birth of the blasphemy slate. Humans have finally perfected the potion system. We formed a tiered system that chains into stable progression paths known as sequences. The lower the number in a sequence, the higher the grade of a potion. At this point, the 7 major churches each control at least one complete sequence. Besides, there are also incomplete paths that they have gathered over the past hundreds or 1,000 years. Blasphemy slate. Klein sharply noticed the term. At the gathering, the Hanged Man had also mentioned it. According to the Hanged Man, the blasphemy slate was the most critical factor of a potion system formation and completion. That seemed to contradict what Dunn had just said. Those were things created by some evil gods. As for which era it appeared, what it contains or what's so special about it, I am unsure as well. If you discover any clues, you have to immediately report it to me. It deserves the highest level of response, says Dunn vaguely. I mentioned one of the types of losing control. I'll now tell you the remaining 4. All right. Klein pushed the question of the blasphemy slate to the back of his mind and listened attentively. Although humans have clever minds, they lack extraordinary powers, it is not absolute. There are always a few lucky ones, perhaps I should call them the unlucky ones. They are born with relatively higher perception. Well, it also means the ability to sense spirits. They can hear voices that others cannot hear and see things that others cannot see. They have partial characteristics of Beyonders. While Dunn spoke, he looked at the empty air around him and watched Klein shudder in fear. In other words, if they are half a sequence 9 Beyonder and have fixed characteristics. Oh, sequence 9 is the lowest grade in the chain. In short, they can only choose a corresponding, fixed sequence pathway. If they consume other potions, the effects might range from mental disorders to a loss of control, or even worse, death. Got it. Klein nodded slowly. The third kind is similar to the second kind. Once you choose a sequence chain, you will be forced to go down the path. There will be no room for regret. If you were to consume potions from the corresponding sequence of other paths, there will be a high probability you will get mixed, unusual and warped powers. But it is almost certain that you will be in a semi-deranged state, sensitive and irascible, cruel and bloodthirsty, and silent and melancholic. And there is only one such opportunity. After that, regardless if you consume the potions from the original path or potions in the present sequence, the only result is a loss of control. The outcome could then be mental death. Alternatively, the body breaks down into monsters or even transforms into an evil spirit. As Dunn spoke, he lifted his coffee cup to take a sip. Klein, who turned alarmed and fearful after hearing this, fell silent for a few seconds before asking, what about the 4th kind? The 4th kind, hey, that is the most common problem. When we consume potions to gain powers that originally belonged to extraordinary beings, we undergo an unnatural transformation. Therefore, we would more or less be affected by the remnant spiritual powers. While perhaps the symptoms might not manifest and are undetectable to others, it will definitely lurk in one's mind. If one rushes to consume the corresponding potion ranked higher in the sequence before fully grasping the extraordinary powers the potion brings and eliminating the subtle traces, the madness will accumulate, increasing the chances of losing control. Dunn suddenly fell silent. After a short pause, he said with a sigh, as per the internal rules of Asnet talks, even if a teammate were to make a great contribution, they must have consumed the last potion 3 years ago and be examined before they can be promoted. Even so, there are still many who lose control every year. How terrifying! Klein drew a gasp as he asked, then what about the final kind? There was no trace of a smile despite Dunn's curved lips. The fifth kind is the most common reason for a loss of control. For Beyonders, one's spiritual perception would be enhanced more or less. The smaller the number in the sequence, the more enhanced their perception. Therefore, they would hear what others cannot hear, see what others cannot see, and encounter things others would not encounter. They are constantly met with mysterious enticement and illusionary bewitchment. Once they are overstimulated or have greedy desires, they will slowly go down the path of losing control. As he spoke, Dunn looked straight at Klein, his grey pupils reflecting Klein's figure. His tone turned bleak as he said, "The founder of the Nitorks, Archbishop Treniz, once said, 'We are guardians.' But also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against dangers and madness. We are guardians. But also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against dangers and madness." The corridor outside the window was sealed, its walls ice cold. The room was illuminated with bright yellow lights. Dunn Smith's delivery echoed, sending blow after blow to Klein's heart. It left him temporarily at a loss for words. Dunn shook his head and smiled when he saw Klein silent. "Are you very disappointed? Beyonders are not like what you imagined them to be. We are always treading alongside danger. There is always a price to any gain." Klein recovered from his shock as he answered with a quivering voice. It was true that he never imagined that the halo, extraordinariness, and the inordinary aspects of a Beyonder would have such hidden threats. Perhaps it was only because he was hearing a description without witnessing it firsthand, and that he had been sucked into the vortex with a peculiar incident already befalling him. Klein soon brought his fear, uneasiness, worry, and apprehension under control. Of course, the thought of shrinking back was inevitable. It lingered around and refused to leave. "Not bad. Very mature and rational." Dunn finished the last mouthful of coffee and added, "Also, Beyonders are not as powerful as you imagine them to be, especially a low-sequence Beyonder. Hey, why would we use one to represent the highest grade and 9 the lowest? Isn't this against intuition and logic? The low sequence we often mention refers to a low grade or a high number. They are the starting point of the sequence chain. All right, where was I? Yes, Beyonders are not as powerful as you imagine. A low sequence Beyonder's power is no match for guns, much less cannons. They are just more fascinating and indefensible than firearms. If you have a chance to become a Beyonder in the future, you must consider what I said today carefully. Do not make a rash decision." Klein gave a self-deprecating smile. "I don't even know when I will have the chance." He felt that he would not miss the opportunity if it presented itself to him. Consuming the wrong potion or a higher-ranked potion in the sequence could be mostly avoided. The major potential danger was the subtle influences the potions and what he experienced from having heightened auditory and visual perceptions. For the former, he could draw on the experiences from generations of people before him. As long as he was not in a rush to advance himself and patiently grasped control over his powers, the chances of losing control were relatively low. Furthermore, he still had to resolve the potential problem that he currently faced. He had to understand the essence of mysticism and seek a way to transmigrate back. These were the underlying reasons for taking the first step. He did not aim for higher sequence spots. If it was easy to lose control, he could just forget about advancement, stay in his original sequence, and rely on knowledge to plan a way home. It was needless to elaborate on the potential risks. Back when Klein held the luck enhancement ritual, he was nearly driven crazy. The murmurings that nearly blew up his head were still fresh in his mind. They were not unavoidable by not becoming a Beyonder. Therefore, it was better to gain power that allowed him to defend himself. With this in mind, Klein felt that the pros clearly outweighed the cons. It made his thoughts of withdrawal almost disappear. Dunn picked up his pipe again as his grey eyes carried a smiling trace to them. "I cannot give you an accurate answer on this. To become a Beyonder, firstly, you must make enough contributions. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after, you will be able to interpret critical ancient documents. Maybe you will be able to give us valuable ideas for one of our cases. Secondly, it depends on the arrangements of the higher-ups. No one can be sure. All right, I believe you should know quite a bit about Beyonders now. In the future, do not make a rash decision. Now, I'll introduce you to our network team's civilian jobs." He stood up and walked to the door. He pointed in the opposite direction of Kenneth Gate and said, "We have an accountant and someone else who is in charge of procuring necessities and collecting supplies handed out by the church and the police department while standing in as a carriage driver. They are professionals and do not need to take shifts, so they can rest on weekends. The other 3 civilian staff are Roseanne, BREDT, and Old Neil. Their jobs include attending to visitors, cleaning the rooms, and writing case files and inventory registration lists. They also guard the armory, storeroom, and the archives, strictly enforcing the registration should someone wish to enter, take out or return an item. Each of them has 1 day off a week, other than Sundays. They negotiate among themselves on the arrangement of night shifts and rest days. So is my job scope the same as Roseanne and the rest?" Klein swept away his thoughts about Beyonders and tried to clarify his job responsibilities. "No, there's no need. You are a professional," said Dunn with a smile. "You currently have 2 tasks. First, every morning or afternoon, go take a stroll outside. Focus on the various streets that lead from Welsh's place to yours." "What?" Klein was dumbfounded. "What kind of job is this? Is that very professional?" Dunn inserted his hands into the pockets of his black windbreaker and said, "After you confirm that you have lost your memories, we will close the case on Welsh and Near. Similarly, the diary of the Antigonus family has vanished completely. We suspect that you brought it with you. You might have hidden it on your way home, which might be why we did not find any clues at your place. This is also likely the reason why you were not there and chose to commit suicide at home. Although you were mysteriously influenced and have forgotten this piece of memory, the human spirit and brain is very fascinating, so there might be residual traces. Dally might not be able to obtain them through her means as a medium, but it does not mean that they do not exist. Perhaps you will feel a sense of déjà vu at a familiar and critical spot. That is what we wish to obtain." "Got it." Klein was enlightened. The Nitork's deduction of the diary's location was indeed reasonable. He was the only one alive among the people involved. Only he had the time and motive to take the diary away and hide it on his way back. "If you can find the diary this way, you will likely make enough of a contribution to become a Beyonder," encouraged Dunn, indirectly revealing the importance of the diary. "I hope." Klein nodded. Dunn changed the subject again. Secondly, you get a day off every week. You can decide which day it is for now. When you are not outside, go to our armory and read the literature and canon books. This is a job for a professional historian. When you finish them all, you will have to begin taking shifts with old Neil and the rest. All right, no problem. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. This is not something too difficult. At this moment, Dunn turned his body halfway and pointed to the black outward swinging gates that was engraved with 7 sacred emblems. This is Kniz Gate. It is named after the creator of the modern network system, Archbishop Kniz. There is one under the central cathedral of every major city. It is guarded by formal network members on rotation. Inside, there are at least 2 keepers who are sent by the church, as well as countless traps. You must not approach it under any circumstance, otherwise, misfortune will befall you. That sounds scary, Klein expressed his feelings. The area inside is divided into a few zones. Stored within are certain potion formulas for certain sequences and other magical materials. It is also used to temporarily hold heretics, mutards, cultists, and members of secret organizations. Hey, they will eventually be sent to the Holy Cathedral, introduced Dunn in passing. Holy Cathedral, the headquarters of the Church of the Evernight God, is located in the Winter County to the north of the kingdom, Cathedral of Serenity. Klein nodded slightly as though he was pondering over the matter. In addition, there are all sorts of classified documents and records inside. When you gain a higher clearance, you might have a chance of reading them. Dunn hesitated for a moment before adding, behind the Kniz Gate, there are also sealed artifacts in the basement. Sealed artifacts? Klein ruminated on the terms. It sounded like a specialized term. Some of the extraordinary items we gather and retrieve are just too important and magical. If they fall into the wrong hands, it would cause immense destruction. Therefore, we have to keep it strictly confidential and watch them carefully. Even we can only use it under special circumstances. Besides, with that said, Dunn paused for a moment before continuing. Besides, there are some things inside that are very special. They had certain living characteristics which can entice the keepers. It would influence the surroundings, attempt escape, and cause catastrophic outcomes. They have to be strictly controlled. How fascinating, commented Klein wistfully. The network headquarters have categorized these sealed artifacts into 4 grades. Grade 0 represents extremely dangerous. They are of the highest importance and of the highest confidentiality. They are not to be inquired, disseminated, described, or spied. They can only be sealed in the basement of the Holy Cathedral, described Dunn in detail. Grade 1 is highly dangerous. They can be used in limited ways. Their security clearance is limited to diocesan bishops or network deacons and above. The central cathedral of diocese headquarters like Backland can store 1 to 2 artifacts. The rest will be handed over to the Holy Cathedral. Grade 2 is dangerous. They can be used with care and moderation. The security clearance requires 1 to be a bishop or a network team's captain and above. The central cathedrals in the various cities can store 3 to 5 artifacts. The rest will be turned into the Holy Cathedral or the diocese headquarters. Grade 3 is considerably dangerous. They have to be used carefully. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people. The security clearance requires 1 to be a formal member of the networks. In the future, you will see the corresponding documents. Through the numbers, you can understand what they represent. For instance, 2-125 means that it is a dangerous grade sealed artifact. No, 125. As Dunn went on, he suddenly turned around and returned to his room. He pulled out a piece of paper from the bottom of the drawer. By the way, take a look at this. 3 years ago, a newly appointed archbishop lost control. For some unknown reason, he stormed through the various levels of protection and vanished mysteriously with a grade 0 sealed artifact. Memorize this photo. If you discover him, do not alert or disturb him. Return to report it immediately or the chance of you dying in the line of duty is 1000%. What? Klein received the piece of paper. There was no title on it, just a black and white photo with a few lines of words. Intzunwil, male, 40 years old. Former archbishop, a gatekeeper who failed in his promotion and was enticed by the devil and was corrupted. He escaped with sealed artifact 0-08. Particular traits are: the picture depicted Intzunwil as wearing an all-black clergyman robe with buttons on both sides and a soft cap. His hair was dark blonde and his pupils were so blue that it was nearly black. He had a high nose and his lips were tightly pursed. His facial features were like a classic sculpture without any wrinkles. The most striking characteristic was that he was blind in one eye. The description of the corrupted is so detailed, but the only thing about the sealed artifact is its codename. Klein honestly offered his first impression. That's why it is at the highest security clearance. The search for sealed artifacts, no, 0-08 is only described verbally and never written in words. Even so, the description will be little, said Dunn with a sigh. 0-08 appears to be a common quill, but it does not need ink to write. That's all. Dunn did not dive deeper into the topic. He tugged at the golden chain on his black windbreaker and took out a gorgeous pocket watch of the same color. He clicked it open and took a glance before pointing outside. I've told you all you need to know. Go to the armory to find old Neil. Get him to arrange the documents that you need to read. He is no ordinary civilian clerk. He was once a formal member, but due to his advanced age, he failed to be promoted. His health is ailing, so it's no longer suitable for him to handle cases. Furthermore, he does not wish to become an internal keeper or rest at home. All he wishes is to be accompanied by documents and records. Okay, Klein bowed slightly as he wore his short top hat again. However, his mind was preoccupied with how sealed artifact 0-08 looked. It appears to be just your everyday quill. It writes without ink. Then, what is its actual use? What makes it classified at the highest level of confidentiality that it's deemed extremely dangerous? Can it be a pen that kills anyone whose name is written? No, that would be way too heaven-defying. Intzunwil wouldn't need to escape and hide away if that were the case. Just as Klein turned around to leave, Dunn suddenly shouted out to him. Hold on, I forgot something. What? Klein turned his head, his eyes puzzled. Dunn put back his pocket watch and said with a smile, later, remember to visit the accountant, Mrs. Oriana, and get an advance payment of 4 weeks, a total of £12. After that, you'll earn half your salary every week until the difference is covered. That's too much. There's no need for this. The amount should be reduced, says Klein subconsciously. He had no objection towards an advanced payment. After all, he didn't even have the money needed to pay for the public horse carriage trip home. However, to receive £12 at once left him a little afraid. No, it's necessary, said Dunn as he shook his head and smiled. Think about it. Do you still wish to continue living in your present apartment? One that needs you to share a bathroom with so many other tenants? Even if you aren't taking yourself into consideration, think about the lady. Besides. He paused when he saw Klein nod in agreement. He smiled and sized up Klein's garbs and said with a meaningful intent, besides, you need a cane, and you should buy a new suit. Klein was taken aback for a second before snapping back to reality. His face immediately burned with embarrassment since the suit he was wearing was cheap and of inferior quality. Typically, a top hat was made of silk, costing 5 to 6 soldi. A bow tie was 3 soldi, a walking cane inlaid with silver was 7 to 8 soldi, a shirt was 3 soldi, while pants, a vest, and tuxedo were around £7 in total. Leather boots were 9 to 10 soldi. As such, an entire suit cost more than £8 and 7 soldi. Of course, to be a presentable gentleman, one needed a watch chain, a pocket watch, and a wallet. Back then, the original Klein and Benson scrimped and saved before managing to save up a pool of money. When they went to a clothing store to check the price, they ended up running off without even bothering to try haggling. They each bought a set at a bargain shop near Iron Cross Street for a total of less than £2. It was also because of that incident that original Klein had a deep impression of the prices of clothes. Oh okay, Klein stammered a reply. He was like the original Klein. He was someone who cared about his appearance. Dunn took out the pocket watch again and clicked it open to take a glance at it. Perhaps you should find Mrs. Oriana first? I know you'll spend quite some time at Old Neil's while Mrs. Oriana will likely be returning home soon. All right. Klein was acutely aware of his state of poverty and did not object to it. Dunn returned to the table's side and pulled out a few hanging ropes as he said, I'll get Roseanne to bring you there. The ropes began their operation as the gears ground, producing a chime from a bell at the reception area of Blackthorn Security Company. When Roseanne heard it, she hurriedly stood up and carefully made her way down. It did not take long before she appeared in front of Klein again. Dunn said humorously, I did not disturb your rest, right? Oh, bring Moretti to Mrs. Oriana. Roseanne secretly curled her lips as she answered happily. All right, Captain. Is that all? At that moment, Klein blurted out in surprise. To get his advance payment from finance, isn't there a need to get an approval letter from the captain? Shouldn't you write something? So, Dunn returned with a question. I mean, don't I need your signature to claim an advance payment from Mrs. Oriana? Klein tried his best to use simple language. Oh, no, there's no need. Roseanne is enough proof. Dunn pointed at the brown-haired girl and gave a reply. Captain, it seems there's almost zero management of our finances. Klein resisted his urge to deliver a sarcastic comment before turning to leave the room with Roseanne. At that moment, he heard Dunn shout out again. Hold on, there's still another thing. Can we finish it all at once? Klein turned back with a smiling face. Yes, Dunn pressed at his temple and said, when you meet Old Neil, remember to collect 10 demon-hunting bullets. Me? Demon-hunting bullets? Klein returned in astonishment. Welsh's revolver is still with you, right? There's no need for you to turn it in. Dunn inserted a single hand into his pocket and said, with the demon-hunting bullets, if you were to face with a paranormal danger, you will be able to protect yourself. Ah, it will give you some courage at the very least. There's no need for you to add on the final sentence. Just as Klein was vexing over the problem, he answered without any hesitation, all right. I'll remember to do so. This will require me to write a formal document. Wait a moment. Dunn sat down and picked up the dark red fountain pen. He scribbled a note, signed it, and stamped it. Thank you, Captain. Klein received it sincerely. He slowly walked back before turning around. Hold on, Dunn shouted one more time. Captain, you look to be in your 30s. Why do you have the symptoms of dementia? Klein squeezed out a smile and turned around to ask, anything else? I forgot earlier that you are not trained in shooting, so getting demon-hunting bullets would be useless. Let's do this. Collect 13 normal bullets every day. Take the opportunity when you are out to go to the street corner of the underground shooting range at No. 3 Jarden Street. Most of it belongs to the police department, but there is one that is specially for Snit Hawks. Oh, right, you also need to get a badge from Old Neil. Otherwise, you won't be able to enter the shooting range. Dunn smacked his forehead and took back the note from Klein. He then added the information and stamped it with another seal. A good marksman is produced by expending bullets. Do not think lightly of it. Dunn handed back Klein the modified note. Got it. Klein, who was fearful of danger, yearned to visit the shooting range that very day. He took 2 steps towards the exit before carefully turning around halfways. He deliberated before asking, Captain, is there anything else? No. Dunn nodded firmly. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and walked straight out the door. While walking, he had the strong urge to turn around to ask another, are you sure there's nothing else? He resisted the urge and finally left the keeper room successfully. Captain has always been this way. He often forgets things. As Roseanne walked by his side, she softly disparaged the captain. Even my Brownie has a better memory than him. Of course, he only forgets the trivial stuff. Yay, trivial stuff. Klein, I'll call you Klein in the future. Mrs. Oriana is a very affable person. It is easy to hit it off with her. Her father is a watchsmith with excellent skill. As Klein listened to the brown-haired girl rattle on, he stepped into the stairwell and returned to the upper floor. He found Mrs. Oriana in the far office on the right-hand side. She was a black-haired woman dressed in a flounced lace dress. She appeared in her 30s and had fashionable curly hair. Her pair of green eyes were clear and smiling, and she seemed refined and elegant. After Oriana heard Roseanne repeat Dunn Smith's instructions, she took out a note and wrote an advance slip. Sign here. Do you have a seal? If not, you can leave a thumbprint. All right. Now familiar with the procedures, Klein completed the formalities. Oriana took out a copper key and opened the safe in the room. As she counted the pounds, she said with a smile, "You are lucky. We have enough cash today. By the way, Klein, were you invited by Captain because you were involved in paranormal activity and the fact that you have a specialty?" "Yes, you have an impeccable intuition." Klein was not stingy with his compliments. Oriana took out 4 notes with light grey backgrounds with deep black patterns printed on them. After locking the safe, she turned around and smiled. "That's because I had a similar experience too." "Really?" Klein showed an appropriate level of surprise. "Do you know about the serial killer that sent Tingeon City into a frenzy 16 years ago?" Oriana handed over the 4 gold pounds to Klein. "Yes, it's the one which had 5 girls killed consecutively. Some had their hearts and stomachs removed by that bloody butcher. My mother often used that matter to scare my sister when we were young," said Klein as he thought about it. He received the notes and discovered that 2 of them were in £5 denominations and 2 of them were in £1 denominations. All of them had a grey background and were inked in black. The 4 corners had complicated patterns and special ink to prevent counterfeiting. The former notes were slightly bigger, and in the middle of them was Lowen Kingdom's 5th king, George III's direct ancestor, Henry Augustus I. He wore a white hairband above his rotund face. His eyes were slender and he had an abnormally serious expression. However, Klein felt an indescribable sense of closeness to him. This was a £5 note. It's almost equal to 4 weeks of Benson's salary. In the middle of the £1 note was George III's father, the former king, William Augustus VI. This mighty figure had a thick mustache and a firm gaze. While he was in power, he freed the Lowen Kingdom from the shackles of the old order, allowing his nation to regain the pinnacle spot. They were all good kings. Klein could faintly smell the notes ink that elated and refreshed him. Yes, if the talks had not come in time, I would have been the 6th victim. Mrs. Oriana's tone still hinted at a sense of lingering fear despite the incident having happened more than 10 years ago. I heard that the serial killer, no, the butcher, was a beyonder. Klein carefully folded the paper notes and placed it in an inner pocket of his suit. Then, he patted the area a few times to confirm it was there. Yes, Mrs. Oriana gave a firm nod. He had killed even more before that. The reason why he was captured was because he was preparing a ritual for the devil. No wonder he wanted different organs. "Sorry, Mrs. Oriana, for making you recall such unpleasant memories," said Klein sincerely. Oriana smiled. "I'm no longer afraid. I was studying accountancy in business school back then. After that incident, I've been here ever since. All right, I'll stop keeping you from what you should do. You still need to head to Old Neil's. Goodbye, Mrs. Oriana." Klein took off his hat and bowed before leaving the office. Before he went downstairs, he could not help but pat his inner pocket to make sure the £12 was still there. He did a turn at a cross junction and headed right. It did not take him long to see a half-closed iron door. Knock, knock, knock. While he knocked, an aged voice sounded from inside. "Come in." Klein pushed open the metal door and discovered a cramped room which only allowed for a desk and 2 chairs. There was a tightly locked iron door inside the room, and behind the desk was a hoary elder dressed in a class black robe. He was reading a few yellowed pages from a book with the illumination of a gas lamp. He raised his head and looked at the door. "Are you Klein Moretti? Roseanne said you were very polite when she came over a while ago. Miss Roseanne is really a friendly person." "Good afternoon, Mr. Neil." Klein took off his hat as a gesture of respect. "Have a seat." Neil pointed to the silver tin can with complex flowery patterns on the table. "Would you like a cup of hand-ground coffee?" The wrinkles at the edge of his eyes and mouth were deeply recessed. His dark red pupils appeared slightly turbid. "It doesn't seem like you drink coffee." Klein acutely noticed that Neil's porcelain cup was filled with clear water. "Ha ha, it's a habit of mine. I do not drink coffee after 3 in the afternoon," Neil explained with a laugh. "Why?" Klein asked in passing. Neil held back his smile as he looked into Klein's eyes and said, "I'm afraid that it would affect my sleep at night. It will make me hear the murmurings of the unknown existence." Klein was momentarily unable to answer him as he changed the subject. "Mr. Neil, what documents and books should I read?" As he spoke, he took out the note written by Dunn. "Anything that has to do with history, or are complicated and incomplete. To be honest, I have always been trying to learn, but all I can achieve is a rudimentary grasp. It's just too troublesome for the other material, such as people's diaries, contemporary books, epitaphs, etc. meant in Neil. For example, the things I have here require more detailed historical records to determine the exact content." "Why?" Klein turned confused. Neil pointed to a few yellowed pages in front of him. "These are from Russell Gustave's lost diary before his death. In order to keep things secret, he used strange symbols he invented to take records. Emperor Russell, the Transmigration Senior." Klein was taken aback as he immediately listened attentively. Many people believe that he did not truly die, but instead became a hidden god. Therefore, cults which revere him have always been holding various rituals to attempt at gaining power. "We will occasionally encounter such incidents and obtain a few original or duplicated copies of the diary," Neil said with a shake of his head. "Till date, no one has been able to decipher the special symbol's true meaning. Therefore, the Holy Cathedral has permitted us to keep copies for research, hoping that it will bring them a pleasant surprise." With that said, Neil revealed a smug smile. "I have already deciphered a few symbols and have confirmed that they represent numbers. Look at what I discovered. It's actually a diary. Yes, I wish to use history from different periods, especially events that revolved around the Emperor. By comparing those records to the ones written in the diary for the corresponding day, I can try to interpret more of the symbols. That's the mind of a genius, right?" The old gentleman with white hair and deep wrinkles looked at Klein with bright eyes. Klein nodded in agreement. "Yes. Ha ha, you can also take a look at it. Tomorrow, you will have to help me with this diary." Neil pushed the few yellowed pages towards Klein. Klein turned them around and took a glance at them, but it immediately stunned him. Although the symbols had been copied in terribly ugly fashion, to the point of looking a little distorted, there was no way he could be mistaken. This was because they were words he was most familiar with. Chinese, and its F*** King simplified Chinese.